The Silver Ghost, the Phantom, the E-Type. These were not merely machines, they were rolling sculptures, physical manifestations of the British Empire's dignity. When a Rolls-Royce glided past, the world stopped to stare, acknowledging the absolute supremacy of British engineering. Everyone believed this dominance would last forever. They thought the sun would never set on their industrial prowess. Yet today, if you open the hood of these legendary vehicles, you will not find the heart of a British lion. You will find German engineering documents and Indian corporate strategies. The spirit of Ecstasy now reports to BMW in Munich. The winged bee of Bentley is a jewel in Volkswagen's crown, and Jaguar, the very icon of British speed and elegance, is owned by Tata, a company from a former colony that Britain once ruled. It is a humiliating reality that the United Kingdom now hosts these brands only as a landlord, not as an owner. How did a nation that was once the world's second-largest automobile manufacturer, a titan that exported confidence to every corner of the globe, lose absolutely everything? While the rest of the world was obsessing over the future, Britain was fatally in love with its past. They celebrated tradition while their foundation rotted away. This is the story of how the greatest names in luxury became nothing more than expensive labels on foreign products, and how a refusal to change turned a glorious history into a tragic eulogy. In the 1950s, the United Kingdom stood as the world's second-largest car manufacturer. On the surface, it was a golden age, but if you walked into a factory in Coventry, you would not see the future. You would see the past frozen in time. While American factories were embracing automation, British managers turned their noses up at such methods. They proudly declared that their vehicles were hand-built works of art, not mass-produced commodities. They believed that a panel beaten by a man with a hammer held a value that a machine could never match. They romanticized inefficiency, convincing themselves that manual labor was a premium feature. "We do not compromise," they claimed. In reality, they were refusing to evolve. They were competing against the efficiency of Detroit and the emerging precision of Germany with nothing but stubborn philosophy. Everyone warned them that the era of the handmade vehicle was ending, but they believed the badge on the hood was powerful enough to defy economics. They were wrong.
Craftsmanship is a romantic concept, but in the brutal arena of industrial manufacturing, it became a lethal trap. British engineers mocked the Germans for being soulless because they embraced robotics and rigorous standardization. They laughed at the emerging Japanese obsession with zero defects. To the British elite, a car that didn't require a mechanic's constant attention lacked character. But while a British craftsman spent hours manually filing down a door panel because the initial stamping was imperfect, a German robot fitted 1,000 doors with microscopic precision. They called this human touch, soul. The customers, however, stranded on the side of the highway with steam pouring from their engines, called it incompetence. They focused obsessively on the smell of the Connolly leather and the grain of the walnut dashboards, willfully ignoring that their electrical systems were archaic and their engines were prone to overheating. They believed that luxury meant exclusivity, and exclusivity meant doing things the hard way. But a human touch inevitably introduces human error. By the time they realized that reliability was the ultimate form of luxury, the technological gap was too wide to bridge. They were still busy carving statues while their competitors were building spaceships. The refusal to standardize was not a noble defense of tradition, it was an act of industrial suicide. The factories became battlegrounds, not centers of production. The British disease wasn't just a metaphor, it was a paralyzing reality of endless strikes and bitter labor disputes.
While Toyota workers were submitting thousands of suggestions to improve efficiency, British workers were walking off the line, often over trivial disagreements. Management viewed employees with aristocratic disdain, and the workforce responded with deliberate sabotage. The silence in these factories was deafening. It wasn't the silence of precision, it was the silence of stagnation. Cars frequently left the assembly line with missing parts, loose bolts, and mismatched panels. The joke became that you needed to own two Jaguars, one to drive and one to keep in the repair shop. They were trading on their heritage while producing garbage. The world was demanding reliability, and Britain was offering excuses. They blamed the unions, they blamed the economy, but they never blamed their own toxic culture. By the time they stopped fighting each other, the customers had already left to buy Mercedes and Lexus, brands that didn't require a prayer to start on a cold morning.
The year 2008 marked the ultimate historical irony. Jaguar and Land Rover, the vehicles that once transported the Queen, were put up for sale by Ford. The buyer was not a European aristocrat or an American titan. It was Tata Motors from India. The symbolism was inescapable. The former colony had returned to buy the crown jewels of the empire that once ruled it. The skepticism was immediate and bordering on racist. Critics sneered, asking how a company famous for manufacturing cheap trucks and the tiny budget-friendly Nano could possibly understand the heritage of a Jaguar. They predicted that the quality would deteriorate, that the brands would be stripped of their essence and turned into budget commodities. The British press mourned the death of their industry. But while the West mocked, Tata wrote the check. And then they did something the British management had never done. They invested billions without ego. They didn't try to make the cars Indian. They gave the British engineers the funding and freedom to finally make them properly British again. The irony is stinging. It took the financial power and strategic patience of an Indian conglomerate to save the British automotive soul from extinction. When everyone said the legacy was dead, the subjects saved the masters. Today, if you visit the pristine factories at Goodwood or Crewe, you are witnessing a theatrical performance, not an industrial triumph. Yes, the hands stitching the leather are British, but the brains directing them speak German. Rolls-Royce is merely the ultra-luxury division of BMW. Bentley is a Volkswagen wearing a Savile Row suit. Even the Mini, the cheeky icon of 1960s London, is just a fun-sized BMW. The Britishness of these cars has been reduced to a marketing gimmick, a carefully curated aesthetic to sell nostalgia to the wealthy. Peel back the wood veneer and you find a chassis developed in Munich or Wolfsburg. The profits from these sales do not build schools in England, they strengthen balance sheets in Germany. Britain has become a theme park for the automotive world, a place where foreign owners come to harvest heritage while the actual innovation happens elsewhere. The brands have survived, certainly, but they are no longer national champions. They are trophies on someone else's mantelpiece. We kept the names, but we lost the game. The story of the British automotive industry is not merely a history lesson. It is a grim warning to every market leader who believes they are too big to fail. It teaches us that a glorious past is the most dangerous narcotic a company can consume. The fatal mistake was not in valuing their tradition, but in believing that tradition alone was a strategy. They confused stubbornness with integrity, and they paid for it with their sovereignty. True heritage is not preserving the ashes of the past, it is keeping the flame alive. It requires the courage to change the very things that made you famous when the world shifts beneath your feet. A name, no matter how royal, cannot defy the laws of economics or the relentless march of technology. You cannot drive a car forward if you are staring only at the rear-view mirror.
Innovation does not disrespect tradition, it honors it by ensuring it survives. If you stop moving because you are too busy admiring your own reflection, you will eventually be bought by someone who is busy building the future. The tragedy of the British car industry serves as a permanent monument to a harsh reality. If you do not innovate, your tradition becomes nothing more than a souvenir for the highest bidder. We must remember that tradition should be the foundation we build upon, not the grave we lie in.